side of it, again, we're going to accrue the costs as we have people to consume services, schools and otherwise. The revenues are going to accrue perhaps differently.
That's true. In general, though, the revenue and expenditures will come at around the same time. House gets built, house gets sold, somebody moves in there, there will be expenditures and revenue at that point.
But the revenue from those transfers, again, assumes steady state, and that may take us 5-10 years to get there.
Fully, yes, but there will be housing turnover of the handful of units that get built the very first 6 months or a year.
And those numbers will be less than.
Yes, that's correct. Okay. Expenditure numbers will be lower, revenue numbers will be lower as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Renee Rockwood.
Relatively short and sweet. One quick thing, you mentioned the average value you used for your estimate of the single family homes, the 4 beds. What is the estimated average value expected of the carriage homes?
The average out sale is projected to be $649,000.
And then, I do have questions, but they don't pertain to this witness. Just process-wise, when is the appropriate time to ask those?
If you'd like, ma'am, I am happy to talk to you when the hearing concludes this evening.
Okay. Okay, I think they're probably questions for Toll, but...
Okay, why don't you go ahead and ask them now? What's the question that you have?
I'm just curious why you guys decided between 1 and 2 to make the shift in housing type?
Oh, yeah, we're not going to answer those questions at this time. We're going to go through our direct case.
I'm sorry, what is the direct case mean?
Direct testimony, we have our witnesses that we'll be presenting on.
Okay.
We're not going to be taking questions from the audience.
So yeah, if you have other questions that may pertain to other witnesses, they'd have to be asked at that time. If it's related to the fiscal impact, it would be for Mr. Babbitt. If you have a process question with the way the hearing is running, if that's something you'd want to discuss, I'm happy to talk to you about that offline when we're done
I
this
think
evening.
they're general questions for a Toll representative versus a fiscal, so
Okay.
I think at some point that we can ask those questions.
Thank you, ma'am. James or Susan Mutter? Not hearing anyone. Ann or John Hellion?
Thank you. Good evening. Getting back to the 214 school children, at an average of 25 students per class, that would be anywhere of infrastructurally 8 or 9 classrooms. I know many of the schools have been retrofit recently. Couple of questions. First of all, where would these children be put? And when you baked your numbers, did you include in these numbers the need for possibly more retrofitting of the schools? I can't say all of them are going to be elementary, all of them are going to be middle school, all of them are going to be high school. Along with that, we're going to need teachers. We're going to need, if it's elementary, we're going to need 9 teachers, an average of maybe 50 plus benefits, plus health, music, physical education, counseling, psychology. We're talking expenditure of anywhere from $500,000 to $600,000, perhaps more. When you baked your numbers, did you include these as part of the baking?
Well, I think you're asking several questions, and I'll be happy to answer all of them, and if I miss one, please remind me. So let's start with the last question you asked, and that would be the expenditures for teachers and secretaries and janitors and bus drivers and maintenance people and whoever else.
Yes.
Those are all in the expenditures in this analysis because they are expenditures of the school district that are operating, annual expenditures like clockwork. If this development requires the district to hire 9 new teachers, I think was the number you mentioned, then that number is reflected in the additional expenditures that I've projected here of $3.7 million, which is it's a hefty expenditure.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first question you asked was an issue of facilities.
Infrastructure and 9 classrooms, where are you going to put these children?
The answer is that is something that I do not know which schools these children will attend. That is not up to me. That is not up to the applicant. That is up to the school district. Now, the school district can choose to educate these children in one elementary school versus a different elementary school. It could choose to split them up between 3 or 4 different elementary schools. That's the school the school board's decision. In terms of overall expenditures, however, overall, throughout the entire district, Westchester spends about $20,000 per student per year, and I'm applying that cost to these new students, of whom there will be only 185, not 214. 214, that number is all school-age children. 185 would be the public school children, and that's a significant difference between the two. That's where that $3,715,000 number comes in. Now, if you're asking whether it is possible that the district will need to build new facilities for these children, the district is already involved in building new facilities having nothing to do with this development, and I can't answer that, and perhaps Dr. Scanlon can. Maybe he can, maybe he can't, but the district is required by state statute to educate the children within the district, and it, I will say, does an excellent job of that, and keeping its taxes relatively low compared to some of the other school districts in Chester County. So the district, I think, is building a new elementary school, perhaps to replace Mary C. House Elementary School, and may well add classrooms or wings or add entire new facilities. I don't really know. I cannot judge that. I do know that the district engaged in capital planning that included the school kids from this property in its planning efforts. So to a degree, the kids have already been taken account of in various calculations and projections by the school district.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Am I roughly correct, Dr. Scanlon?
Right. Not your chance to ask questions, Mr. Babbitt, respectfully.
If you just give me a thumbs up, that would be good.
We're almost done. Let's keep moving ahead. Mylan or Sharon Grubal?
You said that the average sale price for the single families would be between $830 and $920, correct?
Well, 800, am I looking at the right study? Yes, 805,000 for the smaller singles, 910,000 for the largest.
Okay. Did you look at other developments that are within a mile and a quarter that are very similar in terms of square footage and lot size to see how your pricing compared to theirs? And these are luxury, quote-unquote, luxury homes, single families, 2-car garage at least, if not 3.
No, I did not, but I'm sure Cole has.
Okay, the sale price of Westtown Woods, the average sale price for a 3,800 to 4,200 square foot home on approximately a quarter acre is between $650,000 and $710,000. So it sounds to me, and these are brand new homes, these are not resales, so these are homes that are just now on the market. It sounds to me like your pricing is inflated, and that in turn produces extra revenue that is very possibly not going to come, which then impacts the bottom line of the township.
Mr. Grubal, I have to ask you to ask a question rather than make a statement.
Is it possible that your costs are inflated?
Well, I don't know. I rely on the applicant to provide me with some input figures. What I do know is that other Toll Brothers developments have sold with prices in this ballpark, and in my view, I don't see very much difficulty to have Toll sell at these prices. But you're right, if the input figures change, the bottom line will change as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. David Teal? Thank you, sir. And then Patrick McDonough?
Quick, everybody asked a lot of those questions I was going to ask. Given the price of these homes, especially the single detached homes, most of them have basements with walkout access. In your calculations of occupants, did you include those spaces which would be probably converted to either additional living spaces or bedrooms?
No, I assume that they all would have 4 bedrooms. And that's how I determined the demographic multipliers single-family detached, 4 bedrooms of a certain value, and clearly these are the higher-end values than in Pennsylvania. And once I zero in on those 4 factors, I get a number from a table in a pamphlet, and that's the number I use. It's the number I have used.
So you don't.
Mr. McDonough, I'm sorry, can you just get a little closer to the microphone? We're having a problem hearing you.
Sorry about that.
Thank-
So you haven't looked at Westtown in particular when you've done these numbers. You've taken it from a Rutgers study, but you haven't done any analysis in Westtown.
No, that would be either exceedingly difficult, if not absolutely impossible, to do in Westtown specifically. The numbers that I have were compiled by Rutgers, but they are of Pennsylvania homes. Homes actually built in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania between 1990 and the year 2000 and studied in the 2000 census. It's all across the Commonwealth. The assumption is the demographics don't change terribly much between southeastern and northwestern, central Pennsylvania, and so forth.
So Philadelphia region is just like Lancaster County.
In terms of the number of persons and number of school-age children per unit, within other characterizations, dwelling types, sizes, so forth, yes.
And as a member of the Montgomery County Planning Commission, I heard you say you did not go back and look to sort of reiterate or validate your analysis. In your role as a planning commission, did you make decisions based on a financial analysis or quality of living?
Well, I would think both. Obviously, one is part of the other. While I worked at the county, that was a long time ago, I did, I think, only one fiscal impact analysis, but it was a big one for an entire township, East Norton Township, I think it was, near Norristown, in the context of a comprehensive plan that we were working on for the township. And the manager of the township, who was very fiscally minded, shall we say, asked us to determine the projected revenue and expenditures from build-out under current zoning versus build-out under a proposed land use plan where there were some changes from current zoning. And that's what we did. That was my very first fiscal impact analysis 31 years ago.
And as an expert witness of Toll Brothers, you've done the financial analysis. You know the site. Is it, as a planning commission member, do you think this is a viable development for Westtown to build in its community?
Well, first of all, I'm not a planning commission member any longer.
But that's on your resume. So you
Well,
have
I
that.
was, from 1989 to 1997, but I'm in private practice now. I'm not associated in any formal way with any county planning commission for that matter. But to answer your question, yes, I think it is a viable development. I think that because of a variety of factors, most notably the Great Recession we've just lived through, there has been a tremendous decline in what we call household formation. For those of you who have some background in demographics, people have not been forming new households, moving out on their own, getting married and having kids and so forth to the same degree during the Great Recession, say 2008 through maybe 2013 or 14, compared to years prior or years subsequent to the recession. So in the couple of years since the end of the Great Recession, we've seen a great deal of household formation to a much higher degree to reflect the fact that it didn't really happen that much during the recession. Now, a good deal of that household formation in the last few 5, 6, 7 years has been multifamily housing. And I'm sure you and a lot of other people have seen apartment complexes springing up in a variety of places. And my wife constantly asks me, are they going to find people to fill these? And the answer, I think, is yes, or else, largely speaking, they wouldn't get built. No one builds a $50 million or $100 million development only to have it sit empty, at least not around here. Whether it happens in Las Vegas or Florida, I don't know. But around here, people are much more conservative in that regard. So I do think that this will be a successful development. I think it will have success in terms of the sales. I think the sales prices are going to be within a reasonable margin of error, right around what the applicant has told me is anticipated for the site, and I think it will become a positive part of the community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any parties who are here tonight whose names I did not call? Okay, so, well, we did name Mr. Crebilly already, so I'd like to come to the board now and ask if you have any questions.
Mr. Babbitt, I just have a couple questions. So on your numbers as compared to your 2016 report and this new report that you just issued, the number of anticipated residents upon build-out now is 937. Is that accurate?
937 that build out in full occupancy, yes.
And then when you first did this study for Crebilly 1, under the only plan that was pursued, it was 960 residents. Is that right?
For option A, that is correct. That's the same number of units, 317.
And am I not correct that the reason for the difference, the number of units is the same, but you drop 23 people or whatever because of the mix of units?
Yes, it's the distribution of dwelling types that has changed, correct.
But then if we look at the number of students, it would be in the public school system, you have 177 students according to your 2016 report, is that right?
That's correct.
But it's up to 185 for your current report or your current opinion?
That's correct, and that's also because of the difference in the distribution of units.
Okay. On page 3 of your report, you list the various funds of the township. You have the sewer operating fund, do you see that?
Yes,
And then over on the next page, you say you don't take into account the impact on certain funds, including proprietary funds like the sewer fund.
that is correct.
Can you just tell everybody what you mean by a proprietary fund?
A proprietary fund is a fund where it is, in essence, self-enclosed. It's all in one boat. The revenue from sewer rents and tapping fees will offset the expenditures for the sewer fund, and there will not be any use of general funds from the township to use to cover the expenditures in the sewer fund.
Okay.
If the sewer fund needs more revenue, then the township will raise the sewer rentals or the tapping fees or some combination, I guess, and it will not raise taxes because the public sewer system, I gather, does not cover every single home in the township.
But so I'm clear, your current report and the testimony you provided does not analyze at all the potential impact on the sewer fund, right?
That's correct, because it is not a regular operating fund of the township. It's a separate fund. Similarly, I would not study, what are the other ones that are not included in here?
Well, isn't the real reason because for the project as presently constituted, there's going to be an on-site system?
Honestly, I don't know.
You don't know?
I was not asked to study the design of the property or whether there are public or private facilities involved other than roads, I suppose. I do not know whether it's an on-site system or a public system.
Okay, so as we move forward, if at any point in time the shift goes to connecting these 317 units to the township's public sewer system, there will be a fiscal impact then, correct?
Well, there would be an impact to the sewer fund, yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Because you're going to have tapping fees,
Oh, yes,
and you're going to have quarterly sewer expenses, correct?
that's correct.
Okay. So, but at this point in time, you're not providing any testimony related to that potential impact. Is that right?
That's correct, one way or the other.
All right. That's all I have.
So accustomed to calling you David, I'll continue that. You can't hear me?
Yeah, I think we're actually over-modulating.
Okay,
I
let me
suggest
turn-
that you
David, let me turn
lower
it
the
down.
volume.
Let me turn it down. How's that now?
That's a little bit better.
I'll make it even better. I'm going to ask you questions for re-clarification, okay? Just so that we understand this, is that you're using the Rutgers census, which is actually regarding the population in the 1990s as the census was the 2000 census, correct?
Well, it's the population in 2000. That's that snapshot. It's a census every 10 years. You're familiar with that, yes. But it looked at housing that was built in the 1990s.
That being the case, I'm going to quote you, the purpose of the fiscal impact is predicated on the development being fully built out. That's the quote that you used, approximately. And then we're supposed to look at the Rutgers census. I'm trying to put 2 and 4 together and see if I get 6. If we're looking at the build-out, well, first of all, my question to you is, when will this full build-out take place?
That is a question I cannot answer. I would expect the development to take several years to build out, but there are some unknowns that I cannot answer, such as when the development will start being built.
So we could be looking, I'm not going to ask this as a question, we could be looking at something that is 5 to 10 years from now for build-out, assuming there is the development. And at that point, that will still be predicated on the census of the year 2000, so we're really looking at something that is 25 to 30 years old, am I correct?
Yes, but again, the census figures just provide us with that one set of input figures, the demographic multipliers. And in order for there to be a demonstrable change between the demographics of housing built in the 1990s versus housing built in the 2020s would be a bit of a stretch for an assumption. Again, assuming exactly the same dwelling types, sizes, and values.
So when we read about the impact of the millennial generation and their impact on the housing that they look for, the residents they look for today versus, let's say, the boomer generation, doesn't that have an impact on trying to figure out as to who the market's going to be, and is it realistic?
It may, but perhaps in ways that are multifaceted and in some ways offset. Millennials, as generalizations go, tend to have smaller families, fewer kids, which suggests that the expenditures to both the township and the school district will be lower for millennials compared to, say, baby boomers like me or other generations. At the same time, the revenue side of it won't change terribly much because of the projection in the value of the units. Millennial or otherwise, someone is going to need a minimum annual household income of $220,000 and change in order to afford a single-family home priced at $910,000 in today's environment in Westtown Township. And whether it's a millennial or whether it's an elderly couple or a single individual or what have you, the revenue isn't going to change very much. The expenditure side may change a little bit.
I'm going to use the number, the lower number of annual income of $164,900, okay? And that would be based on the anticipated sales price of $649,000, if I got it correct. Am I right?
So the carriage homes are projected to require a minimum annual household income level of $164,536. Is that what you said?
Approximately so.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
What will be the, but this is predicated, as you said before, on a snapshot at full development. And if that's the case, what will be the interest rate or the mortgage interest rate at that point?
I do not know.
Well, then how can we? I accept that. So I'm just.
If I had a crystal ball, I'd be in Atlantic City right now.
That's why I'm trying to get my hands around it. Is that?
Well, Mr. Pomeroy, let me tell you that interest rates right now, mortgage rates, are pretty much rock bottom,
Really?
lower than they've been at any point in decades. Either those interest rates are going to stay more or less the same, or they're going to go up over time. If they go up, what it means is that it takes a higher level of household income to afford the same price house. And with a higher level of household income, there will be additional earned income tax revenue to the township and the school district.
And so that, Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, if interest rates go up, township and school district revenue also goes up.
The assumption, though, there then is that everything kind of remains the same except for the interest rate goes up. What would be the impact, potential impact, and on the fiscal impact for the township if the prognosticators who are saying today that there will be another recession, and it could be a difficult one over the next 5 to 10 years, which fits the timing, if you will, of the full development build-up that you reported? What will be the impact at that point on the overall fiscal impact on our township?
That's an excellent question. And I could conjecture until the cows come home. I don't know if I will give you an answer that satisfies you, but among other things, I think it would be clear that the pace of construction would decrease, so there would be fewer homes built in a given period of time. It might have an impact on the value of the homes, the price of the homes. It might not. If certain homes are built and not sold, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, in certain ways that's the best possible scenario for the township and the school district, because you're going to be receiving most of the revenue from those unoccupied homes, and yet be spending almost no money. The school district spends absolutely no money. So some of these things offset. It's difficult to say with any level of clarity what the impact will be.
Last question for you, David. It deals with the multiplier effect, which is an area that I do understand. And at the beginning of the process, or this evening, you referred to, you said, your multiplier method is X. First of all, can you again explain your multiplier method? And then would you explain how your method might compare to others, experts like yourself, of how they characterize or quantify their multiplier method?
Well, if by the multiplier method you mean the per capita multiplier
That's
method.
correct.
Yes, I'll be happy to explain that. What you don't mean, correct me if I'm wrong, is the multiplier effect.
Well, that would be my
Multiplier
next question after you answer the first
Well, the
question.
multiplier effects, so that we're on the same page, is something used in an economic impact analysis, not in a fiscal impact analysis, and that measures, an economic impact analysis measures the economic impact of a proposed development on a region's economy. So a dollar spent in a region might end up being respent and respent, so that a dollar has the impact of $2.5 or $3 or $3.50 over time. That would be the multiplier effect. That is not my study. I am not qualified to do that sort of study. I've never done one. I'd like to stay as far away as I can from a study like that. The per capita multiplier method is the most common method of fiscal impact analysis, especially for residential development, because it is relatively straightforward and it is easily understood by both applicants and municipal officials and the public. Other practitioners would do largely the same methodology as I've done. And if not, then the only other alternative would be a case study method, which is the method that I did when I looked at the Presby Homes CCRC, and that's the highly in-depth analysis, going and asking the public works director, the recreation director, and the police chief, and the fire marshal and fire chief, what will be the actual expenditures from this development, and they're quantified differently, not on a per person or per unit basis, but overall, what will it cost you, how much money will the police department spend on this development? And the police chief provided me with a number, and that went into the analysis.
I appreciate that. I said one last question, forgive me, we'll end with the following question. And it kind of follows up one of the questions that one of the others asked. Let's assume for a minute that your analysis is incorrect. It's wrong. What will be the impact on this township, assuming that all things happen and just the numbers are wrong and the outlook is wrong? What will be the impact? What will be the cost to this township, both quantitatively and to some extent qualitatively, if you can get into that?
Well, I can try to answer your question, but let me ask you to clarify your question. Wrong in what way?
Let's assume that your numbers that prove to be incorrect.
Okay, which numbers?
Any
Expenditures?
could be expenditures,
Okay, if
and
the
certainly on the revenue side.
What was the last thing you said?
Certainly on the revenue side.
Okay, well, let's take them individually. On the expenditure side, if I'm wrong, if it costs more than $500 per person to provide more or less the same level of services that you provide to other existing residents of the township, and maybe it's whatever, 550, 600, then the expenditures will exceed what I've projected here. But I will note that, once again, the revenue that I'm projecting is essentially double the expenditures. So are you saying that is it possible that the expenditures that I've shown here at $500 will be, the reality will be that the township will spend $1,000 per person? I really don't think that's going to happen. And I'll take it a step further and say that if the township, for some reason or another, spends $1,000 per person to provide services to the township, this development, this particular development, these 317 homes, will still come closer to breaking even than the vast majority of other homes in this township, simply by virtue of their lower assessed value and their lower market value.
So were you to be asked the question, what's the worst case scenario, based on the questions that I asked and the answers that you gave, you're suggesting the worst case scenario is that there would be a break even and really there's no appreciable impact.
Well, I would think that the expenditures would have to be significantly higher than what I've projected, and the revenue would have to be significantly lower than what I've projected, and even if both of those are true, you're still probably looking at a break-even situation for this development. However, if both of those are true, it's the other 3,900 or so dwelling units in the township that were going to represent a significantly greater problem for the township's bottom line than this particular development, simply because they're not going to be valued at $910,000, $805,000, and $649,000.
Appreciate it. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Edelman, I think we're back to you. Do you have any further redirect for this witness?
No, I don't.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Babbitt. Ma'am, you're not a party.
So I'll never be able to answer any questions?
That's correct. You are able to make comment during public comment. Okay, thank you. I think you're finished, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Mr. Edelman, anything further tonight?
No, just a request that when Supervisor DeWolf has an opportunity to review the transcript, if the township could let us know, so if we have to make arrangements to bring back Mr. Babbitt, we can.
Of course, absolutely. All right, so just to confirm then, Mr. Edelman, you agree that we would stand in continuance until March 25th, 6 p.m. We would come back here to Ruston, and you would begin presentation of additional witnesses.
That's correct.
And during that time period, you're going to go back to the Planning Commission and address their comments from the recommendation.
That's correct.
Okay, anything further from the board for this evening? Okay, thank you all very much. We'll stand in continuance.